Good morning, everyone. This is Doug. This is an episode entitled, Why Does Kristi Burke, that's the young lady over here to the bottom right, trounce Bart Ehrman in views, that's likes and views, in critiques of Paul? Both of them have been critical of Paul, but she's crushing Bart Ehrman, the scholar who's famous and has many books to his credit. Why is that? We're going to get into that today. But here's the subtitle. Both are exposing the problem of Paul, but Kristi clearly beats Bart Ehrman in popularity. So this is going to investigate why, and I think you'll see ultimately the answer. So first of all, as in this video, Kristi herself made the remark how astonished she is that she, having been doing nothing for years on her channel, just recently activating it and start doing stuff, that she got such overwhelming positive responses. So look at this. This is an article she did, or video article entitled 7 Times Paul Contradicted Jesus. That's all the title was, a clue to anybody to investigate. She has 265,000 views in 1 year. And this is as of, I want to make clear, I'm going to put in the notes so it's recorded. We're today at February 26, 2025. She's got 266,000 views, okay? She has 11,000 likes on this video. Now I want you to go over here. So when this populated on my screen, this is how I saw it, is YouTube just decided to give me a video that was similar in title to her title. So there were 2 videos to the right, and one was, Why Did Paul Hate Jesus and His Followers? Okay. And the other is Paul and Jesus at Odds. Okay. So here's the one with 1 year ago. So she's 1 year ago. He's 1 year ago. He's got 180,000 views, right? She's got 265,000 views. She's beating him by 85,000. He's the scholar. He's the guy with over a dozen books that are famous. Why is he being trounced by a young lady doing out of her living room? Okay, with no, accoutrements, no one interviewing her like Bart always has. This young lady doing that for him. She's just doing it out of the core of her heart. Okay, and that is probably her secret. But I'm going to get into a little more detail of what that true secret is. And 8 months ago, he did a video. Paul Ehrman did Paul and Jesus at Odds, and he has 128,000. He's chasing her badly. He's got 4 months to go. Maybe he could tire, but I doubt it. Okay, he's probably going to be right where he is over here, 180,000 for 1 year. And Why Did Paul Hate Jesus? So amazing. Let's take another page look. So she's got 11,000 likes in the same video, 11,000 likes, and he's got how many likes? I went to have to open up that video of his. This is a video he has. Why Did Paul Hate Jesus and His Followers? He has 4,000 likes. She's got 11,000 likes. Same year, 1 year. And why is she getting all the likes and he's just getting, relatively a small percentage of 180,000? She's got 265,000 with 11,000 likes. Pretty astonishing, I would say. Now, here's another remarkable fact. A normative pastor, this gentleman to the right here, he calls himself Honest Youth Pastor, 33,000 subscribers. He's going to go after her. Not Doug, not Bart Ehrman. This normative pastor even tried to rebut a Kristi video critical of Paul. But he doesn't go after Bart Ehrman? Doesn't he have more influence? No. Everyone can see this young lady has more influence than anybody on the planet on this issue of Paul. Interesting, isn't it? A young lady. So let's just find out why. All right, so now we're going to listen to her clip, 7 Times Paul Contradicts Jesus. It's 22 minutes long, but I'm going to just do a couple minutes clip at a time and then make observations as we go. And actually, I'm going to try to show you the proof of what she's trying to say. She doesn't use the screen like I do or try to provide you proof, but still she's not inaccurate. And I'm going to just bolster that so we understand she's coming from a true place, a true heart. And that's what I think is, again, part of her secret is that she's telling her honest feelings. All right, so let's begin by listening to her clip.
Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kristi, and today I want to talk about Paul. The Apostle Paul. I had a vision on the road to Damascus, and now my life has changed, and I'm no longer persecuting and killing Christians, but now I am a mouthpiece for Jesus Christ. Now, if you've been following me on TikTok for a while, you probably already know I've got some beef with Paul. I'm not a big fan, okay? I don't like the guy. I don't trust him. I don't like his writings, and I don't think that he was really aligned with what was written about Jesus. I think they were teaching completely different messages. And it is my opinion that if Christians spent more time comparing the words of Jesus and the words of Paul, I think that they might have a lot of questions for Paul, and they might even see him as one of the false prophets that Jesus warned against. And the reason I say this is because in Matthew 24, Jesus warned of false prophets. Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple and the signs of the end times. It says in verse 1, Jesus left the temple and was walking away, and his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its buildings. He says, "Do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." And his disciples say, "When will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age?" So his disciples want to know what to look for. What signs should we be on the lookout for the end times? And, Jesus answers. And he says, first of all, before anything else, he says, "Watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah, and many will deceive many." But he starts out with a very important statement. Watch out, nobody deceives you. People are going to come, they're going to trick you, they're going to deceive you, and they're going to lead people astray. So be on the lookout for those people. And then in verse 11, after he kind of discusses, some of the things that they'll experience, like earthquakes and violence and war, in verse 11, he says, again, many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. And then again, in verse 23, he reiterates it and he says, "At that time, if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Messiah, there he is,' do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." This is loaded because if you think about Paul and who Paul was, he came on scene very early, and he was persecuting these followers of the way, as it was called in the beginning. It was not Christianity, it was the way. And he was persecuting these people, and then...
All right, so let's take a look at what Kristi was just talking about. This is Matthew 24, verses 1 to 5, and then also 22 to 28. So let's take a look. And this is where Jesus is on the Mount of Olives. It's just prior to his crucifixion, the next day. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for him to show him the buildings of the temple. So this is the temple of Jerusalem where God dwells, Jesus says. And then it says this, "And Jesus said unto them, See you not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." So he's prophesying of the fall of the temple of Jerusalem, which actually happens over 30 years later in 70 AD. Then the apostles, hearing this tragedy is going to happen to the temple, they ask him 3 questions. Verse 3, "And he sat upon the Mount of Olives. The disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall all these things be?" So all these things meaning the stones from the temple falling down. That's question 1. "And what shall be the sign of thy coming?" That's when he returns to heaven, from heaven to earth. So they understood he was leaving and going to depart someplace and come back at some later time. That's what he's been telling them. And then what would be the third question is, what is the end of the world? What will be the sign of the destruction of this world? And so the very first warning Jesus gives, she pointed out, was, "And Jesus answered, said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you." Deception is coming. 5, "For many shall come in my name." That means they'll say, "I am Jesus," saying, "I am the Christ." Therefore, saying not just "I am Jesus," but that implies or indicates that they are the Messiah, "and shall deceive many." Then Jesus picks up on this theme in verse 22 after talking about the tribulation of the era of the temple being destroyed. He then says this, "And except those days should be shortened, there shall be no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." So some of the elect were saved by virtue of the temple destruction ending when it did. Then, so things are still going on after that. "Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not." So this first warning, that was the very first thing to be wary of, someone saying, "I'm Jesus," and then imply they're the Christ. I'll just give you, I don't want to keep you in suspense here, by the way. Paul says in Acts 9, verse 5 to 7, and Paul says to the person or person he can see, with the men also seeing this or hearing the same voice at the same time, Paul addresses this person, "Who are you?" Kyrios, which is just simply a polite word for sir, okay, term of respect of various force, sir or Lord. Lord would be if they were your landlord, okay, not if they're God. This is not how you would say, "Who are you, God?" So that's why the translations which say Lord are false, okay, that's misleading. So "Who are you, sir?" Because he doesn't know who he is. And Paul, that Jesus he met says, "I am Jesus." fills right in the blank. And this is 3 years post-ascension, just to be sure we're clear. This is 37 AD. Jesus passed and ascended in 33 to 34 AD. When you are whom you are persecuting. So by saying, Paul, you're persecuting me, is indicating Paul admits that he was persecuting the followers of Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah. So this is no doubt somebody saying, I am Jesus, using the name of Jesus, just as Jesus warned, and saying he's the Christ. By how does this voice indicate that? By saying, whom you are persecuting, who could only be the Messiah himself. And then he gives him some instructions. Okay, rise and go. But here's interesting. Verse 7, the men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice. So this is not something that's happening in Paul's mind. It is simply only in his mind. This is happening so that other people can physically hear it. Okay, but then you're going to learn that they couldn't understand it. But seeing no one. So they didn't see anyone, but they saw a light in another passage. Verse 22, verse 9. Now those men who were with me, Paul says in a speech in a courtroom, saw the light. So even though they didn't see anyone, they saw the light, but did not understand the voice. And Paul otherwise indicates that Jesus was speaking Hebrew. And that's why these men could not understand what Jesus was saying. So, but did not understand the voice of the one who was speaking to me. So these were non-Hebraic speakers. Paul was persecuting Christians with their support and allegiance. And as he's approaching Damascus, he's not in the city of Damascus, he's outside the city of Damascus. He himself hears the voice. The men with him hear the voice. The men see the light. This is not in Paul's brain. This is not a vision. This is an actual appearance. And Paul makes that clear. It's a physical appearance in 1 Corinthians 15, 5-8, when he says, after discussing that Jesus appeared horeo to Cephas, meaning Peter, he appeared horeo to 500 brothers, he appeared horeo to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one abnormally born, he appeared horeo even to me. So he is clearly saying he had the same physical appearance to Paul as if he had had it to everybody else. And this is what violates Jesus' words. Jesus says, when I go, I'm not coming back. No one's going to see me in a wilderness, a desert, outside a city. Jesus says, don't believe them if they say he's in the desert, he's in the wilderness somewhere, outside of a city. Go not forth. Paul was saying that this happened as he was approaching Damascus. He's not inside the city. He's therefore outside in the wilderness, in the desert. In those eras, there's no 7-Elevens on outside of cities. You're in the desert, you're in the wilderness. Behold, he's in the secret chambers. Paul also claims that Jesus met him in a secret chamber. Did you not ever know that? He says that right here. Paul says, this is the account Luke is giving of Paul's accounts. The following night, the Lord, Jesus obviously, stood by him, and said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so must you also testify in Rome. And there you go. He stood by him. It didn't just appear to him in his head in some vision or trance. This was literally Jesus came and stood next to him. Acts 23:11. He's in a locked room, so it's a miraculous appearance. But what kind of miracle? What kind of sign and wonder is this? And who is it coming from? Is it from Jesus, the real Jesus, or some other force? Well, let's go back to Matthew 24, verse 24. Let's see if Jesus thinks that the signs of wonders are possible that can deceive even the elect. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. I mean, these are going to be really good falsehoods, except the elect will have listened to Jesus and will reject this person. If you're not truly elect, you will be deceived by this person. That's really what Jesus is telling you. So if you already have believed in this lie, this representation of Paul, that he and his friends heard Jesus, saw him, heard his words, the light came down and he physically appeared to me. I was born out of time. I saw resurrected Jesus. I saw him in a physical presence. He stood next to me in a room, and he stood in this road of Damascus. And you believe that, then you are not the elect by definition, because you didn't pay attention to Jesus' words. And if you want to become one of the elect, you have to reject Paul and follow Christ, because that's what he's telling you to do. But that's what she's found this message. And congratulations, Kristi. But this isn't why she's magnetized to so many people. You're going to see why, and I'm going to give you a hint. It's because she has women issues in mind. So let's continue.
War In verse 11, he says, again, many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. And then again, in verse 23, he reiterates it and he says, at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Messiah, there he is, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. This is loaded because if you think about Paul and who Paul was, he came on scene very early and he was persecuting these followers of the way, as it was called in the beginning. It was not Christianity, it was the way. And he was persecuting these people, and then he had a vision. He had an experience where Jesus came to him and basically changed his life and told him to turn from those ways and decided to make him a mouthpiece for Jesus. That's what Paul is claiming. But if you listen to Jesus, he's saying, hey, be careful. People are going to come through and they're going to claim to be me or, claim to speak for me, and they're going to deceive a lot of people. I would consider Paul to be someone who deceived a lot of people. If he wasn't preaching the true message, then a lot of people were deceived by Paul, because Paul, he was responsible for kind of the spread of Christianity. And I think it's interesting that Jesus says that false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive. Paul cast out demons, he performed miracles, he performed several miracles according to the text, according to the New Testament. And so he's checking the boxes, right? Like, he comes on scene. He, in Galatians 2:20, which was my favorite Bible verse in my teenage years, I had it painted above my bed. It says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So he is making a statement about how he has essentially died and Jesus took over, and now the one that's living through him is Jesus. So he's essentially propping himself up to be on the same level of Jesus. And it's so funny how so many Christians see this as kind of an act of humility when you die to yourself and let Jesus live through you. And I think that what they're doing is they're actually putting themselves on the level of Jesus, and they're claiming that this isn't me, this is Jesus. Who I am now, who you perceive when you talk to me and interact with me, is Jesus. It's not me, it's Jesus. Like, that's exactly what pastors are doing. That's what people are doing when they say, like, I've died to myself and Jesus lives in me. You're basically calling yourself Christ. You really are. And so, again, Paul is kind of propping himself up as Jesus. He's performing signs and wonders. It even says that he will lead astray as many as possible, even the elect.
I want to come alongside and underscore what Kristi is saying about signs and wonders being a sign of false prophecy, not a sign of true prophets. Okay, Paul will tell you, my signs and wonders are what validate me. Jesus says no. Now listen very carefully to Matthew 7:21-23. It fits in perfectly with Matthew 24. Verse 21 of Matthew 7. And this is Matthew verse interlinear, so you can see the underlying Greek if you know Greek. Not everyone who says to me, Kyrios, Kyrios, Lord, Lord, Master, Master, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Verse 22, on that day, many will say to me, Kyrios, Kyrios, they believe he's Master, Master. Did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, signs, and in your name do many mighty works, signs and wonders. Verse 23, and then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now, what does that mean? So let me do a quick digression on what that means. So I have a video on Matthew 7, verses 21-23, and I mentioned that Timocrates, a Greek author, in 322 BC explained that the word anomia means apostasy against written law, turning away from written law. And he's talking about a speech he's giving in front of a jury, saying what you've been told to do is apostatize by using the word anomia, turn away from the written law of Athens. So the same word anomia has the same meaning here. It doesn't mean you were a lawless person, like you were like disobedient to God's law or something, or even the civil law. It meant you were teaching the people away from a law that is in writing. Okay, so those who call Jesus Lord and do signs and wonders in Matthew 7:21-23, but who then work anomia, that is apostasy against the law, that is in context given Moses, obviously, Jesus will deny he ever knew you. Okay, you're going to claim, I thought he was, I was following the right guy. I thought I was following Paul. He was the right guy. No, Jesus gives you all these warnings. It's impossible that you can justify that on Judgment Day, that you ignored all this evidence and you're just going to follow the guy that completely does away with God's law. Now, people say, well, wait a minute, but the new covenant did away with God's law. It's a new law. We don't have the old law. Well, you didn't read the prophecy of Jeremiah 31:31, did you? Behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will make a new covenant. Oh, does that mean a new covenant with a whole new law? No, with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. And this new covenant, by the way, was to reunite the two kingdoms. It was the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, and he was going to put them back together. And so this was a new covenant of remarriage of these two governments. One was faithful, and that was the tribe of Judah in the south. But the northern kingdom of Israel had defected and was going towards the Assyrians, and this was not a good thing. So they would be brought back together. Then verse 33, but this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahweh. I will put my new law, my law in their inward parts, and I will write it in their heart. I'll be their God, and they shall be my people. So what the new covenant is, it's going to reinvigorate God's law. It won't just be on tablets of stone. It'll be on your heart, but it's not thrown away. It's not done away with, just as Jesus said that the law will not go away. The heavens and earth can disappear. That law will not go away. Now, just to caution everybody, is Jesus very clear. He also referenced Isaiah 56, verses 6-7, as the message for Gentiles on salvation, which is a much narrower set of commands, okay? Basically, the Ten Commandments and keeping Shabbat from defiling it. At that time, it doesn't mean that Jesus can't come with commands that you have to follow because he's the prophet of Deuteronomy 18, but it's a whole other issue. But my point is this, is that Jesus reaffirmed this principle that my law will be in their inward parts by referencing Isaiah 56, 6-7, when he quotes from it, when it says, he casts out the money changers, and he says, this house will be a house of prayer for all nations. That's right out of Isaiah 56, 6-7. I guess that's where it says the Gentiles will be welcome in my holy mountain if they do keep Shabbat from defiling it, meaning resting on that day, and if they keep and hold fast to the covenant. What is the covenant? What is the Ark of the Covenant? Then just think about, what is the Ark of the Covenant? It's a box in which 2 tablets of stone were kept. And what were on those 2 tablets of stone? Oh, yes, the 10 Commandments. And who had to take oaths to it? All the children of Israel who were present at Sinai, as well as who else? The sojourners, Gentiles, who wanted to attach themselves to Yahweh. Okay, so if you are in that category, if you don't want to be a follower of God Yahweh, the Father, Jesus calls him the Father, then you don't have to obey the 10 Commandments, but don't expect to be welcome in his holy mountain, because that's what he says in Isaiah 56, 6-7. It's how you will enter eternal life. You have to keep the Shabbat. You have to not have images that you bow down to and worship. You can't have another face in front of the Father Yahweh and worship him as God. See, all these things are now revolutionizing your life if you're following Christ and you're following what is the true new law. It's the true law, not of the new covenant, which is God's law from the 10 Commandments put more deeply on your heart, because that's our obligation as sojourners. But as to the tribes of Israel and Judah, that would have been the Torah law that applied to the sons of Israel. The sons of the Jacob is actually his name, and it was changed to Israel by God Yahweh. So here's just what we referenced earlier, Matthew 7, 21, 23. And here's the proof I was telling you about from 322 BC, negation of law, basically turning people away from the law, was in the speech of Demosthenes. And this is actually the quote from Demosthenes. And you can see here, the jury is being told, our commonwealth, gentlemen of the jury, is administered by laws and by votes of the people. And if once decisions by vote are repealed by a new law, where will be the end of it? So if you come along and say, well, there's going to be a new law, and, I'm trying this case, I'm going after the criminal, and now somebody's going to pass a new law and get rid of the law. He says, this is anomia. This is apostasy from law. Can we just call such a thing a law? It is not, rather than negation of law. Apostasy, negation of law, doing away with law. It's not the sin. It's not a sin itself. It's doing away with the law that judges whether something is sin or not, and changing it and get rid of that and making it no longer sin. And that's exactly what happened in the middle of the case. He's got a trial, he's prosecuting a guy, and the city of Athens changes the law. And the jury is being asked, don't go along with this ruling, because that's illegal. You cannot accept negation of law, because where is the end of it? Is people could buy their way out of judgments or jury trials by virtue of just bribing enough people to change the law, for example. Then Demosthenes' speech ends, does not such a lawgiver merit our strongest resentment? So a lawgiver who takes and abrogates the law, the written law that was judging people right from wrong, it deserves our greatest condemnation. And Jesus says the same thing in the same way in Matthew 7:21-23. Whoever turns you away from God's law, whoever is guilty of anomia, that's the word right here, anomia, negation of law, in this speech by Demosthenes, deserves our greatest and God's greatest condemnation. And Jesus makes it clear you won't be in heaven. He's going to tell you, I don't even know who you are. This is in Demosthenes against Timocrates, 24:142 at the Tufts Perseus Project. If you want to verify what I just told you, simply go and download from our public domain list this book. It's entitled Demosthenes Against, and one of the books is Timocrates, 1935. And then you'll find this page. Okay, and here's the page. It's page 471. And anybody who knows Greek will see the word anomia there and its declension. And you'll see it's defined as the negation of law in the translation. So what did Jesus warn us about? Warned us away from people who had signs and wonders who teach us to do what? Practice apostasy, negating the law. That's what the word anomia meant there, not lawlessness, not sinful behavior. No, you actually went beyond that. You were telling people to practice apostasy, practice negating the law, practice teaching against God's law being eternal for generations, which it says 27 times in the law of Torah. Okay, so it's just what Paul teaches you has been completely discredited by the words of God and by the words of Jesus and by the correct translation of this passage right here in front of your eyes. And there's no doubt about it. I just showed you. All right, next we're going to pick up where she talks about the contradictions between Paul and Jesus.
I do want to kind of look at some of the teachings of Jesus, some of the teachings of Paul, and let's put them together and let's see if they could even be compatible with one another. Starting in Matthew 23:8-10, Jesus says, "You are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah." So I think it's pretty clear that Jesus is telling his disciples that they are not teachers. They are not instructors. They are not to prop themselves up to be in that position of authority over other people, teaching them things. To me, that's pretty clear here. But 1 Timothy 2:7, Paul says, "For this purpose I was appointed a herald and an apostle. I am telling the truth. I am not lying," says a person who is not lying, "and a true and faithful teacher of the Gentiles." So right there, he's calling himself a teacher. He very much considers himself a teacher, that he spends his letters teaching people how to be Christian. And so it's so interesting to me that Jesus is very specifically says, you are not a teacher. You are not an instructor. You are to be a humble servant. That is your ministry. And then Paul comes on scene immediately and he starts teaching. He starts building churches and teaching them on how to be and giving them rules for how to live. Jesus didn't say to do that. And he didn't say, hey, I'm going to send someone after my death to come along and be your teacher. He didn't say that. He didn't prophesy Paul at all. I would be more convinced that Paul was who he said he was if Jesus had prophesied that Paul was going to come on scene, but he never did. Jesus never said anything about Paul or even implied that there would be a Paul to come on scene after he was gone to continue his teachings. You'd think Jesus would have clarified that. Our second contradiction comes in Matthew 7, starting in verse 21. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and your name drive out demons, and your name perform many miracles?' And I will tell them, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers." So he has said, not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven. It's pretty clear. But Paul says in Romans 10, verse 13, which he's quoting Joel 2:32, but he says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." He's basically saying, like, no matter who you are, if you call on God, you will be saved. But if you look in Matthew 7, Jesus says, not everyone who calls on my name will be saved. So we see conflicting reports here. Our third contradiction comes in Romans 9, where Paul says, "Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden." To me, this is a very clear indication that the Calvinists got it right, although a lot of people would disagree with me. But it does say that God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy. And if he decides he doesn't want to have mercy on you, he's not going to have mercy on you. But Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. If you are merciful toward others, God will show you mercy. If you forgive others, God will forgive you. Jesus says that multiple times. So Jesus is saying that all you have to do in order to receive mercy is to be merciful to other people. Now here, Jesus is saying, if you show mercy, God is going to show you mercy. Do unto others, and God will do to you. But Paul is not saying that. Paul does not reiterate that point. He doesn't say, be merciful to others and God will be merciful to you. He says, God is going to have mercy on you if he wants to. Now in Matthew 5:17 through 20, Jesus talks about not coming to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. He says, for truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who set aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I feel as though Jesus spends so much of his ministry saying, be kind, do the good works, do good things for other people, love others, care for others, be merciful, be compassionate, be humble, be all of the good qualities. Do those things, you will be righteous and you will be called into the kingdom of God. But Paul says in Ephesians 2:8 through 9, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Now, specifically says it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And I think this theme just occurs over and over and over again throughout Paul's writings. It's all about the resurrection of Jesus, having faith in Jesus. It's all about the belief in who Jesus is and what he did, and that is what saves you. That is your saving grace. Whereas Jesus spent so much of his ministry not saying believe in me. He said it very, very few times. He said do the will of my Father, which is what I'm telling you, these rules, be kind, be loving, show compassion to others, do the works. That is how you are saved. Paul says, have faith. That's how you are saved. Now in Mark 10:6 through 9, Jesus says, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. It says, at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, and for this reason, a man will leave his father and be united to his wife. So Jesus is insisting that there is this kind of sacred, divine expectation that people will get married and they will become one flesh and they will honor God through that, because that is the reason the two genders were created. According to Jesus, that's what Jesus is saying. In 1 Corinthians 7, verse 7 through 8, Paul says, I wish that all of you were as I am, which is celibate, because Paul couldn't get any. But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now to the unmarried and to the widows, I say, it is good for them to stay unmarried as I do. So Paul is insisting that people should be celibate. They should not get married. He is not perpetuating this idea that there is this kind of sacred expectation from God that you are supposed to come together as one and be married. I do think it's so interesting that Paul has decided to stay unmarried, and he thinks that is just the path that everyone should take, since he has too. If I can't do it, you can't either. Our next contradiction comes Matthew 5:44. Jesus says, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And this goes on. I don't want you to retaliate. I don't want you to be angry and bitter toward people who don't agree with you or aren't of you, or, your enemies. Even if they are your enemies, don't hate them. Turn the other cheek. Pray for them. But Paul comes along, and in Galatians 1:8 through 9, he says, but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse. He basically just repeats it. This is so important to him, that if somebody else is preaching something different than Paul is, because Paul has the right gospel and everybody else has the wrong gospel, which is a very convenient thing to tell people when you want to make sure that they don't listen to anyone else and they just do whatever you say. Paul says if anybody else is preaching a different gospel, God will curse them. I want them to be cursed by God. I am invoking God's curse upon them. I would argue that invoking curses upon people that are just simply teaching a different gospel than you, they're not even your enemy, but they're sharing a different message than you, is quite a stretch from love and pray for your enemies. I would say that praying for and cursing are probably like, I think they're like polar opposites, you know? I don't think that you can curse someone and pray for them and love them at the same time. Paul comes on scene right after Jesus, and instead of loving his enemies, he just curses all of them. Now, the last one I want to present is not as clear of a contradiction, but I do think that the attitude and the teaching of Paul in this specific scenario is so different than the attitude of Jesus, and that is how Paul treats women and what he thinks of women. In Jesus's ministry, he interacted with many women. And in the book of John, after the resurrection, or at the resurrection, Jesus in verse 17 says to Mary Magdalene, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and to your God." And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that she had said these things to her. So he entrusts a woman to go and tell people what happened, to tell men what happened. Jesus is not putting men and women on these different levels. Jesus is kind of seeing everybody as equal, and in fact, I feel like he elevates women a lot throughout the writings. I'm not Jesus's biggest fan, but I can recognize that he was good to women. He didn't see women as weak or incapable, and he appeared to a woman and told that woman to go and tell people what happened. Tell my disciples. That is a very big stretch from 1 Timothy 2:12, where he says, "I do not permit a woman to teach or assume authority over a man. She must be quiet." Where in any of Jesus's teachings did he indicate that women specifically were not allowed to teach, have authority over a man, and that they were to remain quiet? He didn't. He didn't share that message. And you'd think that if Paul was just continuing the message of Jesus, that Jesus would have said something like this, but he didn't. He showed no indication of seeing women as the weaker vessel. He showed no indication of not wanting women to speak up. He didn't tell women to be quiet. He told Mary Magdalene, go out and tell people, talk, speak. But Paul comes along and he's like, we need to make sure that women stay quiet, and women cannot be teaching over men, which assumes that men can be teaching men can be teachers, even though, like we saw before, Jesus says, don't call people a teacher. You are not a teacher. You must be a humble servant. He wanted people to be servants. He washed feet for his sake. I was going to say Christ's sakes, but anyway, what a far leap from any of the teachings that we read about from Jesus in the Gospels. Now, is it possible that there are teachings that didn't make the Gospels that were being, passed on as oral tradition, and Paul heard those and that's what he was going off of? Maybe. And Jesus didn't make sure to specify, hey, make sure you treat women as kind of second class. That's really important to me. So Paul is adding to the words of Jesus. He's making up his own rules. And to me, these all feel so contradictory to the overall theming, the overall message of Jesus according to the Gospels. To me, reading the words of Jesus and then reading the words of Paul, the two, I feel like they butt heads. Who's gonna win, Jesus or Paul? Well, I know who won out in the modern church, and that's Paul. Paul won out because the churches love to quote Paul more than they love to quote Jesus. They love using the rules and the regulations and all the things that Paul told them to do and Paul told them to be. They like focusing on that way more than they like the idea of just being humble servants and loving people.
Now we're going to hear her closing, and this is what intrigued me, is she even herself noticed that we are growing, this is a quote, at a pretty rapid rate, and an enormously rapid rate, way beyond what makes has to have an explanation. Let me put it that way. And I think you could see 3 different times she mentions women issues, things that concern women, that marriage is insignificant and it's not a sacred union anymore. And that, I think, is a concern to women. According to Paul, it should be disregarded. It's unimportant. It's just better just be unmarried. And so that's one thing, trashing one of the key roles of women. Being married to them is part of, has been social fabric for centuries, for millennia, but Paul is doing away with marriage. If you just pay attention in 1 Corinthians 7. So let's hear Kristi and how she describes what's going on, the success that she's herself surprised about, and why.
And as always, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, ring the bell, do the things. If you like my content, you want to support it, those are ways that you can really help me and help my channel grow. We are growing at a pretty rapid rate. As I make this video, we're right around 20,000 subscribers, which is crazy to me because, you know, I posted videos about a year ago. I posted about 3, maybe 4, and then I didn't post for about 10 months and then I kind of came back full force, and it's been great. I've gotten so much support here. There's been really great conversations. I get a lot of hate comments, but you know what? If you're leaving hate comments, you're helping boost my content and helping people who need to see it. So I thank you no matter what comment you leave, because you are helping me and helping my purpose here, which is to just reach people who are questioning their faith, who are confused, who have walked away and just need a place to hear somebody else sort out all these things they've been thinking about. So I hope that this video helped you. I hope maybe you gained something from it, and I'll see you next time.
All right, so I think this gives a good picture of what Kristi's all about. And now I want to throw this back at the men. Is I believe you don't realize it, but your wives, you Christian, Pauline Christian men, you don't realize that your wives are asking questions. They can find the answers now through going and contacting a person like Kristi. She has their back. She's talking about the condemnation of marriage is not right. It's just her innate sense. Paul's views are wrong. 1 Corinthians 7. Take a look. It's only if you want to get married, it's a worldly thing. It's better to stay unmarried because that's just so much superior to being married. Forget about God said, "Be fruitful and multiply." It's a commandment to the father of all people, Adam and Eve. No, don't worry about that. Don't be fruitful and multiply. Just stay celibate. That's what Paul's telling. And she's saying there's something inherently wrong, and then women be silent, and women are subservient, and basically they have no voice. And Jesus gave them all the voice and treated them with respect and equality. And so what you're seeing is you're going to have to try to enforce inequality and suppress the free speech rights of your wife or your girlfriend or whatever, whoever woman you're with, because you believe Paul is so adamantly correct that you have to squash them and you have to repress them. And so how long is that going to work for you? Let's put it that way. So men, your wives are asking questions. Will you stand on Paul to suppress their spiritual path? That's a big question for each of you. And I suggest you study Paul, my friends, my male friends. And but there's nothing I can replicate about Kristi because it's coming from a woman. And a woman has a different perspective than us men. And I know 2 pastors in particular who are unaware that their wives are secretly investigating the validity of Paul. And so there's probably a lot more of that going on than you know of. And the response that she's getting proves to me that men, you better be prepared. Are you going to be able to defend Paul, or are you going to stand on Christ, which is what I'm recommending you do? So God bless and ciao. Bye.